WMAR2 News presents Voice for Veterans, the end of World War II.
Welcome to a special edition of WMAR2 News. I'm Eddie Kadam.
And I'm Erin McPherson. We're here at the War Memorial Building in downtown Baltimore. 75 years ago, World War II came to an end. After 6 years of fighting, the lights finally came on again.
Tonight we honor the men and women who gave so much of themselves for this country. Some of their stories too difficult to tell, but important to show the humanness behind the history and the lessons that they taught us.
As we take the time to honor our veterans and their sacrifices, we must make sure we're learning from history so we don't repeat it.
We sat down with distinguished history professor Jeffrey Herf to dig into the lessons of the Second World War.
Some wars have very complicated origins. World War II does not have a complicated origin. World War II took place because Adolf Hitler decided he wanted to conquer the rest of Europe and build a 1,000-year Reich, and the only way that he could accomplish his goals was to wage war. Full stop, period, end of explanation.
Für richtig hältst, ob du glaubst.
The reason that Hitler was able to launch this war was that all of his potential adversaries were divided from one another and didn't establish a form of united resistance until it was too late. If a political leader says in public that they intend to murder a bunch of other people because of who they are, we in the United States are accustomed to politicians who say one thing and do another. And we think we're sophisticated when we say, oh, he's just blowing smoke. He doesn't really mean that. And what Hitler said was so ludicrous and so bizarre that many people at the time thought, oh, he's just saying that for some political purpose, but he doesn't really mean it. Well, he meant it. And I think that's one of the most important lessons. If people had taken Hitler seriously, as Churchill said, the Second World War was an unnecessary war. It could have been prevented. Millions of people would not have died if people had taken him seriously earlier.
We knew there was a concentration camp. We knew that they were getting rid of him as soon as they could. We didn't know they were putting him to death by the hundreds of thousands every day. Didn't know that. When I realized it, I went crazy. I went to pieces. Tears came into my eyes. The smell, we don't talk about that because it's not a pleasant thing. But if I didn't have my handkerchief over my nose, I'd have probably suffocated. It was a horrible smell. The odor was overwhelming.
It's very important that people understand that Franklin Roosevelt did not go to war and did not bring this country to war in Europe in order to save the Jews. He was aware of how anti-Semitic, how much anti-Semitism there was in this country, and the last thing that he wanted to do was to tell people in Iowa that they were sending their boys to fight to save the Jews. It was over the course of the war that Americans came to understand more about the racial issues involved in World War II. What convinced the leaders of the United States Navy and military in 1939 that Hitler was a direct threat to the United States was Nazi Germany's threat to Britain. And if Britain was defeated and the British Navy fell into the hands of the German Navy, then Churchill convinced Roosevelt that the United States would be directly threatened.
We must be the great arsenal of democracy. For us, this is an emergency as serious as war itself.
And one thing that Franklin Roosevelt did was to unify this country. He brought people together. If the United States in 1941 was as divided as it is today, I don't think the United States would have won the Second World War. There were people in this country who said, America first, America first, in 1939. We don't care what goes on in Europe, America first. So now America first is famous again in American politics. As Roosevelt understood, you can't mess around in the rest of the world if the house is divided at home. When you have a dictator and there is no freedom of the press, and there is no freedom of speech, and there is no political opposition. If you walk into the boss's room and you say, Herr Hitler, you're making a mistake. This is wrong. You shouldn't do this. Then you pay with your life. So people learn that, and they don't tell the leader what's wrong. And that's why dictatorships are so dangerous, because they make these huge miscalculations whenever people are afraid to tell the leader that he or she is making a horrendous moral or political blunder. And that's an important reason why Nazi Germany lost the war, because it made many, evil beyond belief, but also strategic blunders. Democracies can make mistakes, absolutely. They make many, but they have the capacity, as long as there's a free media and press and political opposition and debate, to correct them. You can't correct a mistake if you're afraid of telling the boss that he's out to lunch. So it's what the Allies did right and what the Nazis did wrong.
During World War II, 407,000 U.S. service personnel were killed. 85 million people died worldwide.
The heroes of World War II were common people from all walks of life. Many of the veterans we spoke with say they're not heroes, but as far as we're concerned, they are. Meet one of them, Reverend James Lane.
I'm a patriotic man.
Lane was in the 5th Infantry Division of the 3rd Army, sent overseas 29 days after D-Day, the invasion of Normandy.
And I couldn't wait till I got there. But when I got there, I couldn't wait to get away.
He served under General Patton and had a couple close calls.
A shell came in so close and knocked me out. And I thought I was dead. Was I ever scared? All the time. Was I ever afraid? All the time. But I really believe that God was with me.
Is there anything that you remember that sticks out in your memory from your service?
Yeah. I would like to talk about it. I'm not a hero. I don't want to be a hero. I'm just a plain old country boy.
Kept bullets out of his head.
Yeah.
Time or two.
Took baths in that. We eat out this, and this was what we put on our head.
Lane received countless awards for his service in the war.
Purple Heart, Bronze Star.
And in Baltimore County. When he got out, he moved to Baltimore, got married, had 3 girls, and built this church, brick by brick.
With no money. Did you hear me? No money. When I was serving in the war, I was a warrior. When I was serving in the country, I was a countryman. Well, one of them is killing people and the other is saving them. Just that simple.
Twin brothers James and George Martin came into the world together on November 19th, 1919. At 100 years old, they still remember their time serving in World War II like it was yesterday.
I've been in the pyramids and the Eiffel Tower in New York and every place else. I completely sailed around the world twice.
They've collected hundreds of stories, and George lost an arm. Good luck trying to tell him that it slowed him down, though.
Just can't clap very well.
Yes, I can.
And who better to tell the story about the freak airboat accident during World War II than his right-hand man?
When people crashed up with airplanes, he'd go out and rescue them. And what happened, the guy stood up, and when the guy stood up, he threw the boat off, and he went back against the propeller and lost his arm.
George lost an arm but gained a soulmate. The nurse taking care of him turned into the mother of his 5 children.
I looked at her, she looked at me, and that was it.
James has maintained his bachelor status for a century.
I stayed single because I could run faster.
Loss of limb or time apart never changed their giving hearts.
Before, most men were helping in the house, in the home. He would help with cooking, and she worked at night as a nurse. He would be there to babysit, just take care of us all. Uncle Jim, if you needed help, that's who you would call.
Their key to longevity: never drink or smoke and keep an open mind.
While George met and married the love of his life while at war, the contributions of women at war have largely gone unnoted.
Tonight, we change that.
This is a man's war.
What sort of jobs can they do?
What sort of jobs can we do? Take a look, mister. X-ray technicians, inspectors of Army meat, teachers schooling our soldiers.
World War II created millions of jobs, and with the men overseas, women joined the workforce in droves. For the first time, women had access to skilled jobs in aviation, industry, and shipbuilding. But it was agriculture that became the trade of half of the women workforce. America needed food at home and to send to soldiers overseas.
We had always imported food from various places, but during the war those sources got cut off.
The University of Maryland became one of the first to train female farmers.
They taught women how to milk cows. They taught them how to plow, how to plant, how to deal with poultry, how to manage various aspects of agriculture.
Those who didn't join the workforce helped from home. Ladies donated stockings to make parachutes and tires. Drives collected bacon fat that was used to make explosives. Maryland women donated almost 35,000 pounds of fat in the first month alone, and 65,000 pounds the next.
Each branch of the military created a women's branch. So there was a women's Army Corps, Women's Air Force Corps, the Waves were the Women's Navy branch of the Navy. And there was one special unit which was called the WASPs, and those were women air service pilots. And they did a lot of testing of aircraft. And about 60 of them lost their lives in doing that. It was quite risky. All of the women's units were segregated. So African American women were not allowed to join any of those branches of the military. And there was a special branch of the military for African American women, and about 6,500 black women joined that branch.
When the men returned home in 1945, they came home to an America that looked very different. Women were forced out of their jobs to become homemakers. Families moved to the suburbs and gave way to the baby boom. But by the 60s and 70s, women returned to work, this time demanding equal pay and more access. Any of the women's rights movements, then and now, find their roots in the women of World War II.
And I think that those women raised their daughters to be more independent, perhaps, than they had been raised themselves.
The contributions of wartime women made America's victory possible and changed the country forever. Women's efforts on the home front kept the men on the battlefront going.
I mean, men fought it, but women did everything else.
Pia Jordan started the Tuskegee Army Nurses Project in 2009 as a way to pay homage to her mother and the other Tuskegee Army nurses. Over the last 11 years, she created a multimedia project to ensure that the legacy of Tuskegee nurses isn't forgotten.
Well, sometimes I also call them Tuskegee Airmen nurses. These were the nurses, and they were lieutenants in the Army Nurse Corps who were stationed at Tuskegee Army Airfield, where pilot cadets, black pilot cadets, were being trained to fly planes. They would later become known as the Tuskegee Airmen. So these women, they were in the military, they outranked the pilot cadets, so the future Tuskegee Airmen saluted them. For every Tuskegee Airman who was on that base, there were 10 support people. And some of those support people were nurses. So the nurses they had to be in charge of the health and the welfare of everybody on the base, not just the pilot cadets.
Because the military wasn't integrated until 1948, there was a struggle for black women to even join the military.
They were educated, registered nurses at a time when not many of them were even allowed to go into the military. It was hard enough for white nurses to get in the U.S. Army. A lot of times when you talk about the military and segregation, fighting against the Germans, fighting during World War II, African Americans did like double V. We're trying to get a victory overseas against Hitler, but we're also hoping that here in the United States we will be recognized. And guess what? No, many of them were not recognized. If African American women had not done those jobs, they probably would have had white nurses who didn't want to be there in a black base. As one Tuskegee Airman told me, it made them feel good, the fact that they had black nurses, that nurses they felt who would really care about them.
2 fights, one against the enemy forces and the other against racism. After the break, we'll share more stories of military men who fought both.
To be African American and at war during World War II meant to be in servitude. That meant driving trucks, unloading equipment, and tending to the houses. Well, that was the case until the all-African American 332nd Fighter Group shot down 112 enemy planes, and the 761st Tank Battalion fought to liberate numerous Nazi immigration camps. William Keyes was in the 761st Tank Battalion and is an example of yet another veteran who says he's not a hero.
So I shot into a building, and I guess we killed people, but nothing I can say about that because I don't know. If they didn't have a white flag up there and they were shooting at you, you got to shoot at them. We went to Ardor and we tore the gates down and went on through there. And later on, Patton and all the rest of the whole of them were gathered there. And we saw these bodies out there, and they were all practically naked. But there was no wounds on them or nothing. That's the first thing you look for. So we didn't know about the gassing even there. I didn't know about that till much later. It's a book written by a Jewish guy, and he tells how he first looked up from his bump, and he saw a black soldier there. And it probably was. See, our unit never fought together. They were always separated, use this part, use that part. You know, they didn't want us to fight together or be together even then. So we were under command of whatever guys we were. Of course, they kept us down, kept us back, and all that sort of stuff. But nevertheless, we did still manage to get here, you know. This year they called me to want to make a hero out of me. I said, I'm not a hero. I'm not a hero.
When we come back, we'll take a look at how one man went from being an ordinary Maryland college student to a war hero to the lead commander of 5 tank units.
At 100 years old, Vernon Foster lives a quiet life. To see him now, you would never guess he spent years on the action-packed front lines of World War II. 13 years in the military, all started from a textbook. Foster was studying farming and agriculture at the University of Maryland when they told him he needed to take 2 years of military instruction. He wound up taking 4, graduating as a 2nd lieutenant. Shortly after, Pearl Harbor happened, so Foster was ordered to report to Fort Knox and eventually to Europe. A 26-year-old Army officer, a commander of 5 tanks with a crew in each.
There were dead soldiers laying all over the fields. And when we were moving toward that town, the guys that were handling my tanks all stopped.
Stopped only for a moment.
But we had to move over top of them. That's something that happened more than one time when we had to take a certain town and there are dead people laying around. You have to keep going. You don't have any excuses. You just have orders to go.
With all the deaths surrounding him, only 3 lives really hit home for Foster.
When my top sergeant was killed and 2 other boys were badly injured, that's the only day during the war that I cried. I cried that day.
Foster described only one major scare, when German troops fired directly at him.
There was a piece about 3/4 of an inch around. It landed about 6 inches from my ear, and it buried itself in the mortar or in the steel in my tank. Now, if that thing had been a foot away this way, it would have killed me instantly, but it didn't. And the people in the aid station picked all the pieces out except this eye, and they put a big patch over my eye and said, well, you better take a couple days rest. You don't need to go back fighting again. You better take a couple days off. So I said, well, thank you, goodbye. And I went right back to my tank.
The piece in his eye is still there today.
They said it wouldn't do any harm unless I tried to take it out. And if I took it out, I'd be blind. So I said, I'll let it stay there.
Germany and Japan finally surrendered after 6 years of fighting. First, it was Germany on May 7, 1945.
For Japan, it wasn't until after the U.S. dropped nuclear bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August of 1945, ending World War II.
Stick with us for one last look at the end of the war that changed America. September 2nd, 2020 marks the 75th anniversary of the end of the war fought around the world. Men and women across the country and right here in Maryland made incredible sacrifices, took on new roles, and lost countless friends and family defending America.
Many of their stories remain untold as time moves on and the country faces new challenges. Tonight, we hope you learned more about the men and women who fought the good fight and shaped today's America. Thanks for joining us.
Have a great night.